When we talk about using data in a team context, this is the first thought that goes through most developers' heads. Data is evil. It's only ever used to embarrass me and show me up or say how bad we're doing. No one ever talks about how data can be used in an effective way for the team, and that's what this talk is about. It's about how to use data and get everyone on the same page and understanding. So the problem with data is that often different people can look at the same data but see something different. Some people can see a duck here, some people can see a rabbit. Data needs to be interpreted, needs to have context around it. And that's where, the biggest failing we have when we use data for coaching is that if it is just on a chart, different people will see different things. And that's the problem, when people see something that they think is an issue, but there's context they don't know about. This is what we need to sort of help break through. So here's my sort of concepts about what's the goal of data-driven coaching. If we are going to set out and we are going to show data to teams and have them use it to improve and get better over time, what do we need it to do? Well, the first thing that we need data at the team level to do is help the teams self-identify and detect things that are abnormal in the system that they're working in. There's something that, this is interesting. The only thing that data at a team level should do is cause a discussion. It's not about embarrassing people. It's not about automating a system of sending out nasty emails when something happens on a dashboard. The only thing that should happen when something abnormal is detected by a team is that the team get asked, have you noticed this? And is there anything we can do to help you out? Is there something that you're facing that we're not aware of? And that's the second thing that we need to do. The moment that we start measuring data, we're at the mercy of people over-focusing on what we measure. Now, we live in a world of software development where it takes a lot of different axes and angles. We need high quality. We don't want to take too long to develop it. We want to make sure that we get feedback from the customer that it was the right thing that we built. We want to make sure that we respond quickly to the most urgent issues. Now, we are at the mercy, if we just measure one of those values, that the teams will overemphasize and strive to achieve that value. And that's what we want to avoid. With data-driven coaching, it's about helping the team understand the holistic view of the delivery system and help them make smart trades between opposing forces. More about that soon. So this was about a year ago, looking at 17th of February in 2017. I sort of tweeted out 5 bits of advice that if you are going to set up and use data in a team coaching environment, what are some things I want you to do? Now, the rest of this talk is going to go through each of these 5 key points, just one at a time, very briefly. We've only got 30 minutes together, so I don't want to waste too much time. So, let's move along. Trends, not numbers. Now, this is, if you can take away one thing, I have a device ready. Take away one thing from this talk. It's about when you're working in a team, or even when you're measuring any metric that you're putting on a dashboard in a corporate environment, it is the trend over time that matters, not the individual number. The trend helps the team understand when they move off trend, when the trend is being bucked. Now, that might be completely good. There might be a reason that we're moving in a positive direction in a trend, which is great. But the risk is that we're moving positive in the trend maybe on how much we're delivering because we worked weekends, which could degrade quality going forward. So it's not that we can say that moving positive in a good direction on a trend is good always, or negative on a trend is bad always. There's always the balance. What you're looking for is to detect that there's been a movement against a trend and have the conversation about what price did I pay for that positive move in throughput? People's lives, because they worked weekends. I'm not willing to accept that. So trends are a very important thing to do. So how do you set that up? Oh, that's why that went. There we go. So here's some ideas. In the dashboards I'm going to show you throughout this talk, there's you're going to see a couple of consistent things. And one is that they're always going to be shown like those there on your left. They're line charts, and I've done a couple of techniques to make the trend overwhelmingly the thing that the eye is going to focus on. One is there's no y-axis. There's no numbers over here. Notice there's no need for the numbers. If you're going to help people focus on the trend, they don't actually need to know the actual value. It is what it is. Second thing I do is I do put the numbers there, but it's a second level of detail. I make it 8-point font because managers can't read 8-point fonts. We're too old. And what happens is that you have a view at 6 foot and then you have a view at 1 foot. So when this is projected in a public space or on a projector in a team room, they're going to be focused more on the way the connected line joins the dots and not the numbers. Thirdly is I always add a trend line, and I always project that trend line forward to give people the feeling of if you do nothing, if nothing changes, this is where this trend is heading. And this is what we want to get the team to focus on, is that over time here, how much work they're getting done is slightly increasing, but it's certainly stabilized. Now, if I just had the numbers there, or the latest one that we had, it wouldn't tell as vivid a story that this team is actually managing to start achieving a more consistent sort of throughput or velocity over time. So it's all about trends. This is the mortal sin, I guess, is if you start measuring people as individual people, and there's a chance that that data could make them embarrassed, and you may not even know that it's going to embarrass someone, but if there's a chance that that data is going to be shown out of context and someone's going to say, look, Joe's terrible, wonder what he's doing wrong, data will be hidden, data will go underground. So I had one manager who I was working with in the company, and I sort of said, you really can't show this dashboard, and I'll show it in a second, and you'll get an idea what I wanted to talk about. And actually, I'll show it right now. It had the individual developers' names and how many defects they had open. And I said, you can't do that. You must take this down. And he sort of said, you coaches are always on the soft side and worried about people. And I said, no, I'm not that sort of coach. I'm a math coach. I don't give a damn about the people. What you've done here is hide data. What happens now is that there's an underground market of Post-it notes that if you found a bug, you would write it on a Post-it note and put it on your friend's monitor. But if you had an enemy, you would actually log it 3 times with slightly different description text. And that would make them show up on the lunchroom. This was in the lunchroom, so people would have to sit there eating their lunch, looking up at, Aaron sucks. So the problem now is there was no real data to forecast when this project was going to finish because there was an unknown number of defects still in the code. So it is just bad practice. It is bad practice to put individuals against this data and have, you're just going to send data underground. You're going to lose perspective about where you are. So there's a good business reason not to give people a reason to hide data. So now we get more into the nitty-gritty about, how do I set it up so that the team-level metrics make sense and can be acted upon? And the one thing is Larry Mascheroni, a friend, he did a study about 5 or 6 years ago, and the premise of it was a long study, so I won't go through it all, was that if you're going to measure a metric on a team, you need to have something from quality, something from productivity, something from predictability, and something from responsiveness. And each of these measures work in tension and opposition with each other. So if you drive one up, you could impact another one adversely. So by setting up this sort of quadrant of metrics, and it almost matters less what metric you use in each of these categories as long as you have one, is that the team has to find a happy equilibrium across all of these 4 competing areas. And if they achieve this, they're probably able to deliver consistently and on time. the whole system becomes more predictable. And if it becomes more predictable, it's far easier to actually forecast and manage and understand this system. So, we can sort of come up with tensions, the obvious ones we know, that if we started delivering just stories as fast as we could, it's probably going to have an impact on quality. If we have a lot of production outages and we want to jump on them fast, being responsive to the latest thing that happens, we're probably going to not get through as much work that was planned. And we're certainly going to be less predictable because the planned work that we have is now being subordinated to high-impact sort of outage work. So there's always tension between these, and a good team, and your job as a coach, is to make sure that they don't overemphasize any one, and that they detect that they're overemphasizing one of these or being forced into a corner where they have to overemphasize one of these, like that previous dashboard on bugs. What it caused was a massive improvement in perceived quality. It hid data, but it did actually make people focus on defects. But it brought down productivity to near zero. So now the team's got nasty emails saying, why are you delivering so slowly? Why are we missing our deadlines? It was because you put a dashboard up in the lunchroom that caused people to over-focus on quality. So how do you do this? That's great, okay, but how much data do you need to come up with a nice quadrant of measures of those 4 pieces of information? And I set out to try and give people an entry point on how to get a dashboard that has those 4 quadrants of measures without too much work. And the only data that you need to collect, and really only need 2 of these, but we can start with that. You need a date that historical work is finished. You need a completion date. And you need a start date that work started. The simplest way of getting this data is if you're using Post-it notes. When you start a piece of work, you pull it into doing, write the start date in the bottom left-hand corner of the Post-it note. And then when you pull it into done and it's been confirmed and released, write the finish date on the bottom right-hand corner of the Post-it note. And use blue Post-it notes for defects and yellow Post-it notes for planned work. And if you do that, you get the start date, completed date, and the type of work. What can you do with that data? Well, I set out to do a spreadsheet more as an exercise to answer that question. And I think I came up with a dashboard which could do 17 different charts just from those 3 different measures. And then I picked, out of those 17, I picked one chart that covered each metric and the ones I chose. And you could choose other ones out of those 17. These are the ones I chose. One was I said, just the ratio of defect work to story work. I want that to be consistent. I don't want to set up a situation where the team does just story work at the beginning and just bugs at the end. I want them to pay down that bug debt consistently on the way through. I want a measure of how much work they're doing, throughput or velocity. I don't really care which one you use, but again, it's all about the trends and it's all about projecting that out to sort of see which direction it's heading. So here, even though the defect ratio is going down, that's not universally good. What it could mean is someone put up a dashboard in the lunchroom which had person defect name, and now no people are hiding defect data. Remember, this is all about the discussion about why is it going down. The team needs to be able to explain that. So responsiveness, I just chose the cycle time range for the highest priority item. So I think I picked the priority 1 work and defects and sort of said, what's the cycle time of doing those? And on predictability, I sort of said, well, how repeatable can this team deliver the same rate of throughput? And it's a simple chart that sort of says, if it's red, more items were started than completed. If it's green, more items were completed than started. And what you're trying to get the team is to sit around 0 here over time, to just be consistently delivering, finishing work rather than starting work. So finishing things in the order that they come through. So this dashboard can all be produced just from the start date, the finish date, and the type. And in fact, if you didn't have the type, the only chart that you wouldn't get is the quality chart. So you could do all of these other 3 metrics just with the completed date and the start date of work. So it's not hard, and there's not a lot of data, and every system that you use, from even the most simplistic implementation of Jira to just Post-it notes on a wall, this data is accessible to you. You already have it, and you can, I guarantee it. But that's not enough. Just having that dashboard doesn't help the team understand how to interpret what it's looking at and know what to do with it. So I always, if I put the dashboard in front of people, I always add an extra little cheat sheet that actually tells them what each part of the chart means. And this is part of one that I sort of released there. One is you show them a sort of snapshot of the chart, you tell them what it is, you tell them that the behavior you're intended to get through it. You tell them how to game it because they're going to do it anyway, so you may as well tell them you already know it. And this is the most important part. You tell them that if you push too hard on how much work we do, how much throughput that we drive it, if we drive it too high by working overtime or late, we expect the quality metric to go up. We expect the predictability to become unpredictable. And we don't want that. So we don't want you just to drive that trend line and this productivity number as high as you can, because as you're measuring this, we're also going to be looking at these other metrics to detect when you've pushed it too hard. So the next point was, show me data in context. Don't go telling me that I've missed a service level agreement on producing a new whole web page versus things which are just small production defects on fixing a CSS bug. So the thing that makes people get offended by data is when they're measured against something they think is unfair. So your job on these dashboards is not to go measuring an operations team against a front-end UI team. They're going to have very different sort of measures and sets of metrics that make sense to them. So I'm going to show you a new chart type that I want your feedback on. So this is about 100 completed items historically for a team. And what we have is down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is the different states in the system. And each white line is a previously completed piece of work that flowed through this system. And you can hover over one of them individually. And now you can sort of see the journey of that completed item through the states, and the height is cycle time. Now, what you're helping people here is to see something that's abnormally different. What's different about the one I've highlighted? Jumping over review, refine, final review, probably got no testing, went straight into production. You can see that because you can see the general pattern in context against all similar work that has flowed through this system, and you can ask a question about that particular one. So even though its lines are in the congestion and the noise, you can still spot different fast. That's the job with the type of charts we want to build. We want to highlight different fast, because that's the ones we want people to talk about. The orange line is the average for each state, so we can see which ones are above average and under average. And this one was over average, under average. Now, when we just measure cycle time at the end, we lose that vivid story of how that piece of work is flowing through the system. And often it can be under, and then way over, like these ones. But we wouldn't know it yet because we just know that it's under the service level agreement or under the control line on a scatter plot. We don't know until it's too late that we need to do something about it. So this type of chart shows data in context of other work that's similar to this piece of work, because you can filter by different types of work, but it also rapidly helps you spot abnormal. It's called a jump plot, and if you download this spreadsheet and you have start date, finish date, and type, those three values again, you can generate this for your data. It just runs in Excel, so it uses macros, so I think you need a PC to do it, so find a PC or create a virtual machine on Amazon. I'd love your feedback on it. It's just a new style of chart, I think, overcomes some of the missing gaps that we have in our world. So spotting abnormal is great, and we can do it by eye, but our real job when we're coaching and setting up dashboards or charts is to make people quickly see just the things that are significant and important. And this is, I think, is the art form. And this is where the traditional charts often let us down. We have the cumulative flows, we have scatter plots, we have burn downs and burn up charts. And on those, we often struggle to see different well enough, because a control limit tells you at the end that you're beyond the cycle time of what it should have been. It doesn't tell you at the beginning. So we want to help people worry, have a discussion about something, why they can still do something about it. That's the job of the coaching, is don't lose the game and say, I wish you would sort of move to a different position back in the first half. You want to say in the first half, you look like you're out of position and this is occurring. So this is the rule I want you to keep in mind. When we're telling people when to worry, what we really want to avoid is telling people to worry when they shouldn't worry. Because if you touch a system, systems have normal fluctuations and variations. There's vacations and holidays, there's bad weather, there's certain people away or a conference that everyone's going to and learning lots of cool stuff. That's not worrisome. What's worrisome is when we can't explain why there's a drift in the data. So you can do a lot of damage by putting charts up in front of teams and having them react too quickly, too soon, needlessly. Where if they just left it alone, gone and had a coffee and then come back and the system would have stabilized, that was the right action to do. So we've got to first do no harm. When we put these charts up in front of the team, we've got to make sure that they don't overreact to just standard system instability. So here's a couple of concepts of how to do that. This was one which showed just the step-by-step time. The grey bar in the background is the average time that cards of that type spent in that lane. So we can quickly see when they're over. See the grey finish there and this one's over. We can quickly see that this is abnormal for a card in that lane of this type. And all I do is I put a red dot next to the ones so that you don't have to hunt around and have a look at seeing where it went astray. And in these ones, you'll sort of see that, this one's going long in doing now. But you'll see a lot where it's, often going wrong in review. But the team is being asked, why are you delivering so late? Well, you want these dots to highlight the fact and build a story as to we can do something to improve if we deal with how we do reviews and so forth. So this is one concept. We always have a reference compared to what, so you never show a line without something to say what you expect it to be. And then you always put some indication that I want your eye to look here first and I want you to ignore the rest. So that's one example. Another example here is this is another chart you get in that team dashboard. It's the work in progress for each week, and the color is the age of work. So the idea here is we're trying to get the team to sort of finish older work first, and this chart sort of helps them see how much of their WIP is greater than 14 days, less than 14 days, less than 7 days, less than 1 day. And I put these little red markers to say, work in progress has gone up more than a certain percentage, or the age of work, the number of items by age has gone up more than a certain percentage. And even though these orange lines and the grey lines go up and down, I've tried to say, but these are the only ones where it's significant enough that you should have a conversation about. You want to control where people look and what they have the conversation about, and you want them to realize that this is sort of all natural variability. I think I do the same thing in this one. Again, I show multiple charts, but I put these little markers on them. So I'm saying ignore, there's not enough significance here. This means that a long-term average, more has been started than finished over the previous 4 weeks. So it's not just a simple calculation. I asked people when they knew they were off the rails, and I turned that into a set of markers that I could show automatically to try and capture the business knowledge where I wanted to force a discussion to be about. You'll notice that I don't use reference lines, because reference lines exceeding or going under it normally isn't the easiest or the correct measure for people to know that they're off track. It just means that one data point's off track. So a lot of these measures are summaries of over the previous 4 weeks or 5 weeks. So in other words, this is a longer term trend that I want to draw your eye to. And with a control chart, the correct way to use a control chart is 3 or 4 samples beyond a control line. But if you put this up in a projector in a room, people will spot just the ones which are exceeding the control limits and react too soon. So it's all about stopping them reacting too soon. So this is the summary. Metrics advice is that you always use trends, not numbers. That you keep the charts talking about teams, not individuals, otherwise you lose the data. That you don't just put a single metric up, that you put a balanced scorecard up of competing and opposing metrics, and you challenge the team to find a way to blend those together and find a happy equilibrium without overemphasizing just one. We show data in context so people can easily spot where something is abnormal for similar types of work. We don't just throw all the data up and have some high cycle times and low cycle times, but mingle the different types of work so that people can lose a story that is abnormal for this type of work, not just abnormal universally. And then show them when they should be having an aggressive conversation because there's a longer term trend, which means that you need to react now because this is trending in an adverse direction and soon it's going to become critical. So everything you saw there today, all that team dashboard and all of the other metrics, you can just sort of download from this location. My whole life is up on GitHub. They're just spreadsheets. They all really are just about 10 years worth of work of understanding. And I've really worked hard to try and minimize the amount of data that you need to get those balanced scorecards and dashboards. And I'd love your feedback. I'd love where it worked and where it didn't work. And with that, I'm happy to take maybe 2 minutes of questions.
Do you have an example of where the quality metrics have gone wrong? When you're taking too much quality into
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great question. Quality metric, have you got examples where it's gone wrong? Last week, I challenged the team to come up with a dashboard for the quality metric, and the one they came up with, of course, was just the defect count. And then immediately they put a control limit on it to actually sort of say, we don't want more than 15 defects, or we don't want the trend to be above average by more than one standard deviation. And I said, what do you think will happen if we show that? Well, the defects will go down. And I said, well, no, I think the defects will stay exactly the same. I think people will stop reporting them. So putting a control limit and just counting the number of defects is pretty much the mortal sin. What you're going to have happen there is you're going to lose the ability to know how quality is going to be. So the measure which I got them to convert it to, of course, was just the ratio of the amount of planned work versus defects and challenge the team to keep that stable. So the quality metric, you most vividly see it if a company, there's 2 patterns. One is that people do quality at the end, and they do the final integration, regression testing right at the end, and they have this huge fluctuation of bugs at the end. And the reason that's bad is that you lose the ability to forecast when it's going to release because you have a known amount of work to do and an unknown number of defects. So your job of your quality metric is to make sure that bug debt and defects are paid off continuously throughout the project. So you got to think about what can I show that encourages people continuously logging and fixing the defects at the first possible moment in time. So it's not about sort of driving defects to zero. It's about making sure that it's paid off continuously. It is the toughest metric that you're going to have to find a way to not cause bad behavior. So love your ideas on quality. It's the one I struggle with most.
I have a question. Did you have a chance to integrate with existing management tools like Crowley, Jira, etc.? There are a lot of data available, a lot of charts, graphs, etc.
Yeah, so the question is integrating to your current tools. I have. A lot of it is, I've not been into organizations where there's just one tool. So often the times it's actually importing lots of different data from different tools and having to merge it into one, which is why I'm so sold on just the 3 data points I need, the completed date, the started date, and the type of work. And you can often get those out of any of the tools. I tend to go in and do that custom for companies, but if I have a spreadsheet, it's not a lot of data to transpose. The interesting thing about automatically importing data from tools is you get all the noise and the mess as well of things that will never ever happen again. And if they truly are abnormal, something went down, your whole production was down, that doesn't help people spot abnormal in a trend. So I would rather not show that data. So having charts built into tools tend to lose the context of what was happening on that week and that period of time. Whereas in a spreadsheet like this, you just delete the row or delete the record, and now it's gone from the team's visibility. So once they explain it and it's abnormal, I get them to delete it. And I'm at time. Paul's pointing to his watch. Well, thank you.